Sense or fallacy. Unpacking Sapiens. A brief history of humankind in the shortest time. From animals to gods. How did we get here? Hello, welcome to the DEEPSIGHT podcast channel. Thank you for listening to today's in-depth interpretation. I am your time travel navigator, Lawrence Stardust. Today we are discussing the book that made its author famous, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by the Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari. Since its first publication in Hebrew in 2011, this book has been translated into 45 languages, sparked huge global reactions, and sold over 10 million copies. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and Barack Obama have all publicly recommended it. It is neither a traditional historical chronicle nor a dry academic work, but rather an intellectual adventure spanning 100,000 years of human existence. Yuval Noah Harari was born in Haifa, Israel, in 1976. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Oxford and is a historian I greatly admire. I have read this book many times, and each time I come away with different feelings. While I have profound insights, I also have different views, but that does not make it any less of a fascinating and curious book. Harari is currently a professor in the Department of History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He specializes in world history and macrohistorical processes, and is often called a maverick scholar. He focuses on extremely broad historical narratives, drawing on a wide range of disciplines, and is passionate about examining the origins and evolution of Homo sapiens as a species and of human society as a whole from the perspectives of biology, anthropology, sociology, psychology, economics, and even neuroscience. Reading this book is not tedious. Rather, you become immersed in the author's unique perspective, his astonishing breadth of knowledge, and his sharp, witty style. Harari has a rare ability to explain complex academic concepts in an accessible way without losing depth or edge. So what is this book about? In short, it attempts to answer a fundamental question. 100,000 years ago, there were at least 6 different human species on Earth. Why are only Homo sapiens left today? We were once an unremarkable group of apes in a corner of Africa, with as much impact on the planet's ecology as fireflies or jellyfish. We had neither the fangs and claws of lions, nor the speed of antelopes, nor the bulk of elephants. For a long time, we occupied a middle position in the food chain, surviving by gathering plants, hunting small animals, and scavenging leftovers from large predators. Our ancestors were constantly in danger of becoming a saber-toothed tiger's dinner or perishing in a wildfire. Yet, tens of thousands of years later, we left Africa, spread across the globe, walked on the moon, developed nuclear weapons, and are now editing genes and creating artificial intelligence. Why are we the masters of the Earth today? What happened in between? Harari's answer can be condensed into a single sentence. The key to human success lies in our ability to tell fictional stories. It is this ability that transformed an otherwise unremarkable species into the force that reshaped the face of the planet in just a few tens of thousands of years. By fictional stories, he does not mean lies, but rather those entities that exist only in the collective imagination of humans. Gods, nations, money, laws, corporations, human rights, justice. Concepts that cannot be found in the objective world but are profoundly real in our shared beliefs. They are what enable countless strangers to cooperate flexibly and on a massive scale, thereby overcoming every competitor. The book is structured chronologically around 4 key revolutions: the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, the unification of humankind, and the scientific revolution. Today, we will follow this thread and, in 1 hour, explain this magnificent work. We will walk the African savanna to see how our ancestors rose from marginal beings. We will step into a wheat field and ponder whether we domesticated wheat or it domesticated us. We will travel through Babylon, Rome, Mecca, and London to see how money, empire, and religion bound humanity together. And finally, we will enter laboratories and factories to witness how the scientific revolution gave us near-divine power while confronting us with unprecedented confusion and crisis. Are you ready? Let's start with the first question. How exactly did Homo sapiens win? Why, among so many human species, are we the only one left? Part 1. The Cognitive Revolution. What made Homo sapiens win? Harari opens the book with a cold shower of reality. He says that humans have long been accustomed to seeing themselves as unique, the pinnacle of creation, the children of God, the essence of the cosmos. But from a biological standpoint, humans are actually a rather unremarkable animal. We belong to the genus Homo, and our species is named Sapiens, wise, a label that is itself a boast, one we gave ourselves. No other animal has given itself such a grand name. For 2 million years, humans remained a weak, marginal species. Our ancestors lived on the edges of East African forests and grasslands, feeding mainly on roots, fruits, and seeds, occasionally hunting small animals, but more often scavenging leftovers from large predators. Where patterns on early hominin teeth show heavy consumption of tough plant fibers and raw meat. Their tools were rudimentary. Chipped stones, sharpened sticks, and even bows and arrows came much later. Their brains were slightly larger than those of chimpanzees, but without the explosive growth that would follow. For 2 million years, tools hardly changed, and lifestyles showed little progress. They did not possess the creative drive we associate with humanity today. Life was a repetitive cycle of gathering and foraging. What is even more surprising is that we were not alone. Several other species of the genus Homo existed simultaneously. 100,000 years ago, there were at least 6 different human species. Neanderthals in Europe and the Middle East, who were stronger and had larger brains than Homo sapiens, better adapted to cold climates, and having lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. Denisovans in Oceania, who lived in Siberian caves with unique genetic adaptations. Homo soloensis in Indonesia, a small human species living on tropical islands. Homo erectus in Siberia, one of the earliest hominins to leave Africa, and possibly Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits, standing under a meter tall. These brothers and sisters lived in the same era and often the same lands as us, and some were even better adapted to their environments. But today, they have all vanished, leaving only Homo sapiens. This raises an intriguing question. How did Homo sapiens win? In physical terms, we were not as strong as Neanderthals. We had no clear advantage in brain size. In sensory terms, our sight, hearing, and smell are inferior to many animals. In terms of physical strength, speed, and agility, we cannot compare to large predators. So what trait allowed us to stand out in the brutal competition for survival? Harari's answer is language. But not just any language. Language with a special function. Other animals have language too. Monkeys use different calls to warn of snakes or eagles, a basic alarm system with limited vocabulary and unable to express complex concepts. Whales and dolphins produce complex sounds, and different whale populations even have distinct dialects. Bees even dance to communicate the location and distance of nectar with remarkable precision. But the common limitation of all these animal languages is that they can only describe immediate reality. There is an eagle. There are flowers here. They cannot discuss what happened yesterday, plan for tomorrow, or talk about something completely imaginary. The uniqueness of Homo sapiens' language lies in 2 things. The first is gossip. Biologists and anthropologists believe that Homo sapiens can produce a particularly wide range of sounds and combine them into highly complex sentences, enabling us to pass on vast amounts of social information. Our language evolved into a tool for gossip. Homo sapiens could discuss who in the tribe was trustworthy and who was not, who had conflicts with whom, who was having an affair, who was good at gathering, who was skilled at hunting, who had shown bravery in battle, and who had shrunk back at a critical moment. This may seem unpleasant, even somewhat vulgar, but its effect was remarkable. If members of a tribe could gossip about each other, they could build complex social networks, with everyone understanding the character, abilities, reputation, and past behavior of others. This made cooperation smoother, trust easier to build, and group cohesion significantly stronger. Sociologists and anthropologists have found through extensive fieldwork that gossip-based mechanisms allowed Homo sapiens tribes to reach about 150 members, far larger than any other primate group. Chimpanzee groups generally number only a few dozen. Beyond that, they split due to lack of sufficient social bonds. Gossip allowed Homo sapiens to break this biological limit on group size. But the truly revolutionary feature was the second, discussing fictional entities. Other animals can convey real information like, there is food here, or there is danger there. But only Homo sapiens can talk about things that do not exist at all, things they have never seen, heard, or that will never appear in the objective world. Legends, myths, gods, religions, souls, curses, amulets. All these are fictional stories. Harari writes, The truly unique feature of human language is the ability to transmit information about things that do not exist at all. After the cognitive revolution, legends, myths, gods, and religions also emerged. Discussing fictional things is the most unique function of Homo sapiens language, unmatched by any other animal. This ability may seem trivial, but it completely changed the human survival landscape. Why is fiction so important? Because it gave Homo sapiens an ability no other species had: large-scale, flexible cooperation. Biology tells us that in nature, group size is limited by social bonds. For any species relying on instinct to maintain groups, once the number exceeds a certain threshold, the group splits due to inability to build enough mutual trust. For chimpanzees, the threshold is about 50. For early Homo sapiens, without fictional stories, the threshold was about 150. But Homo sapiens broke through this 150-person ceiling through fictional stories. How? Through shared imagination. Harari writes, whether it is a modern state, a medieval church, an ancient city, or an ancient tribe, the foundation of any large-scale human cooperation lies in a fictional story that exists only in the collective imagination. Let's look at specific examples. The foundation of Catholicism lies in religious stories. Christians believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, crucified for humanity's sins and resurrected. This belief enables thousands of strangers to pray, give, and cooperate in the same church, even willing to sacrifice their lives for this faith. The so-called nation is also based on national stories. Two Serbians who have never met, both believing in the existence of the Serbian nation, its territory, flag, and anthem, may risk their lives to save each other in war. The legal system is based on legal stories. Two lawyers who have never met can work together to defend a complete stranger, only because they both believe in the legal system, principles of justice, and the concept of human rights as truly binding. The operation of modern corporations also relies on fiction. A company is not its office building, its employees, or its products. It is a legally constructed, fictional entity. But this fictional entity can own property, sign contracts, sue and be sued, and even continue to exist for centuries after its founder's death. However, Harari sharply points out, all these things actually exist only in the stories that humans have invented and told each other. Outside the common imagination of human beings, there are no gods, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice. This statement sounds shocking, but it is not a nihilistic proclamation. It is a profound insight into the nature of human cooperation. If you can make a group of strangers believe the same fictional story, such as the same God, loyalty to the same nation, or belief in the value of the same currency, then thousands or even millions of strangers can cooperate effectively and flexibly. Religion is a fictional story. The nation is a fictional story. The law is a fictional story. Money is also a fictional story. They all exist only in the common imagination of humans. But it is these imagined realities that enabled Homo sapiens to organize societies on a scale far beyond any other species. More importantly, these fictional stories can be changed. When old stories no longer serve, we can invent new ones, thereby rapidly adjusting the ways of social cooperation. This flexibility is unmatched by genetic evolution. Genetic evolution takes hundreds of thousands of years to produce significant changes, while cultural evolution takes only years or even months. Harari's core argument is that Homo sapiens dominates the world not because we use tools or fire. Other animals use tools, and fire appeared in human ancestors much earlier, but because we are the only animal that can believe in fictional stories. Fictional stories allowed humans to bypass the slow lane of genetic evolution and take the fast track of cultural development. Harari writes, because large-scale human cooperation is based on fictional stories, by changing the stories we tell, we can change the ways humans cooperate. Since the cognitive revolution, Homo sapiens has been able to adjust its behavior rapidly according to changing needs. This opened a fast road of cultural evolution, instead of staying on the always congested road of genetic evolution. Once culture appeared, it could no longer stop changing and developing. These unstoppable changes became what we call history. Thus, the cognitive revolution is the starting point from which history separated from biology and became independent. From then on, human destiny was no longer determined by slow genetic mutations, but by rapid cultural evolution. The cognitive revolution brought not only enhanced cooperation, but also a dark consequence: mass extinctions. Between about 70,000 and 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens spread from East Africa across the world. Wherever they went, large animals suffered. About half of all large terrestrial mammals weighing over 50 kilograms went extinct. When Homo sapiens reached Australia, there were 24 species weighing over 50 kilograms. Today, only one remains: the kangaroo. Giant kangaroos, giant wombats, giant lizards, and giant birds that once roamed the continent all disappeared within a few thousand years of the arrival of Homo sapiens. When Homo sapiens reached the Americas, North America had 47 genera of large mammals. By about 10,000 years ago, 34 of those genera had gone extinct, including saber-toothed tigers, giant ground sloths, proto-cougars, giant camels, and giant bison. These animals had lived in the Americas for millions of years and had evolved defenses against local predators, but against the never-before-seen bipedal hunters who could throw spears, set traps, burn forests, and coordinate hunts, they had no chance. Harari calls this extinction wave the human flood. This human flood of extinction swept across Australia, the Americas, and various islands as Homo sapiens advanced. Homo sapiens united themselves with fictional stories, but with real weapons they eliminated competitors, including all other human species: Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo soloensis, Homo erectus. All these human brothers and sisters who shared the earth with us ultimately disappeared in the wave of Homo sapiens expansion, either slaughtered, pushed to marginal areas, or driven to extinction by resource competition with Homo sapiens. From then on, Earth became the exclusive home of Homo sapiens. Part 2. The Agricultural Revolution, history's biggest fraud? About 12,000 years ago, human history entered its second major turning point, the Agricultural Revolution. It began in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, today's Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, southeastern Turkey, and western Iran, and then independently emerged or spread to the Yellow River Valley of China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, and the Sahel region of Africa. Traditional historical narratives tell us that the Agricultural Revolution was a great human advance, from a wandering hunter-gatherer life to a settled farming life, with more secure food supplies, population growth, and the emergence of villages, towns, cities, and civilization. We have been taught from childhood that agriculture was a great achievement of human intelligence, a prerequisite for civilization. Without agriculture, there would be no writing, states, art, or technology. But Harari proposes a startling view. The agricultural revolution may have been history's biggest fraud. He invites us to look at it from a different angle. What if we think from the perspective of wheat? 10,000 years ago, wheat was a common wild grass, confined to a small region of the Middle East, its seeds naturally falling and scattering, difficult to gather intensively. But today, wheat occupies millions of square kilometers across the globe, from the North American plains to the North China Plain, from the Black Earth of Ukraine to the Ganges Plain of India. From an evolutionary perspective, wheat is one of the most successful plants on Earth. Its DNA copies outnumber most plant species. And what was its secret? It domesticated Homo sapiens. Harari writes, the real culprits were a handful of plant species, including wheat, rice, and potatoes. Humans thought they were domesticating plants, but it was plants that domesticated Homo sapiens. This statement may sound like wordplay, but it contains profound insight. Homo sapiens thought they had domesticated wheat. We sow, water, weed, harvest, thresh, grind, and bake. But from another perspective, it was wheat that made Homo sapiens give up the freedom of wandering, stooping to work day after day, damaging their spines, knees, and feet. Human skeletons were originally adapted to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Our bodies were designed for running, climbing, and throwing, but were tortured by farm labor into various degenerative diseases. Archaeologists have found in agricultural-era skeletal remains numerous diseases rarely seen in hunter-gatherer times: severe arthritis, herniated discs, bone spurs, tooth decay, and iron deficiency anemia. Farmers' bones were smaller and more fragile, and they were generally shorter by more than 10 centimeters. Their teeth were riddled with cavities due to high starch intake. These tangible signs of physical degeneration give Harari's fraud theory a solid scientific foundation. The core change brought by the agricultural revolution was total food supply increased, but individual quality of life declined. Hunter-gatherers worked 3 to 6 hours a day to obtain enough food. They did not need to worry about breakfast tomorrow, as edible plants and animals were everywhere, and they simply gathered as needed. Their diets were extremely diverse: wild fruits, nuts, tubers, insects, small animals, fish, birds, with almost no nutrient deficiency. They did not need to store large quantities of grain, so they did not need to build granaries, allocate guards, or deal with thieves. They migrated year-round, following food sources, and when tired of one place, they moved to another, always maintaining freshness. Many anthropologists call such societies the original affluent society. Short working hours, diverse food, no large-scale infectious diseases, relatively egalitarian social relations, and little violent conflict. Farmers, on the other hand, worked from dawn to dusk all year round, bound by agricultural tasks: spring plowing and sowing, summer weeding and watering, autumn harvesting and threshing, winter processing and storage. They had almost no free time. Their diets were extremely monotonous, often relying on one or two staple crops, with over 80% of calories from wheat or rice. This monotony led to severe malnutrition, lack of protein, vitamins, and minerals. Infectious diseases broke out frequently in dense settlements: smallpox, measles, influenza, tuberculosis, leprosy. Diseases that killed countless lives only appeared after the agricultural revolution. Hunter-gatherers, being nomadic and low density, could not sustain disease spread. Farmers lived year-round in crowded villages, sharing dwellings with animals, with waste everywhere and polluted water sources, creating breeding grounds for pathogens. When droughts, floods, or insect plague struck, widespread famine ensued because farmers relied on a few crops. If these failed, entire villages could face starvation. Harari summarized the essence of the agricultural revolution, making more people live in worse conditions. But the problem was that once agriculture started, there was no going back. Population exploded after agriculture. Every piece of farmland could feed 10 or 100 times more people than foraging grounds. When population swelled to a certain point, returning to hunter-gatherer ways was impossible because it could not support so many people. Thus, humans fell into the wheat trap and went down a path of no return. Harari calls this the luxury trap. Humans sought an easier life, releasing a tremendous force that changed the world, but the result was neither anticipated nor desired by anyone. No one orchestrated the agricultural revolution or intended to make humans dependent on grain. It started with small things, mostly just wanting to eat a bit more and live a bit more safely. But the cumulative effect was that ancient foragers began spending entire days under the scorching sun, carrying water and tending crops. The agricultural revolution also brought another major change: a dramatic expansion of social scale. With surplus grain, it became possible to support those who did not farm: priests, bureaucrats, soldiers, artisans, artists, kings. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities, and cities eventually merged into kingdoms and empires. Hunter-gatherer tribes usually had only a few dozen to 100 people, while agricultural towns could have thousands, cities tens of thousands, and empires millions or even tens of millions. But then came the problem: how could millions live together without chaos? In face-to-face societies, kinship and neighborhood relationships maintained order, but in a sea of strangers, there had to be common rules transcending personal relationships. The answer was again fiction. The Code of Hammurabi was fiction. It claimed to come from the sun god Shamash, but was actually compiled by Babylonian scholars and kings to maintain social hierarchy and class interests. The Declaration of Independence was also fiction. It claimed all men are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights. But biology clearly tells us that humans are never born equal. Each person differs greatly in talent, ability, birth, health, and more. But it is precisely these fictional orders that allowed millions of strangers to live together under the same rules, trusting and cooperating without endless chaos and violence. Harari points out that all large-scale cooperative networks, religion, state, law, corporations, currency, are orders constructed by imagination. They exist only in our shared imagination, but it is these imaginations that shape our entire lives. Every day we wake up believing that this nation is real, that the banknotes in our hands have value, that the law protects our rights, and that companies will pay us on time. These beliefs constitute our entire social reality. If one day these shared beliefs collapsed collectively, the entire social structure would also disintegrate. That is why every cultural crisis, faith crisis, or currency crisis in history has triggered such intense social upheaval. The agricultural revolution also brought another consequence: the entrenchment of social hierarchy and inequality. In hunter-gatherer societies, tribe members were relatively equal because food could not be stored in large quantities. No one could accumulate far more wealth than others. Even the strongest hunter could not store dozens of times more meat than others because meat would soon rot. Thus, wealth gaps were small, and social status depended more on age, wisdom, and courage than on wealth. But agricultural societies had surplus grain, and some could control its distribution, leading to freemen and slaves, nobles and commoners, rich and poor, rulers and rulers. These hierarchies may have started as accidental differences, but over time, they were woven into myths, religions, and laws, becoming natural and eternal social structures. Harari writes, "Biology enables, culture forbids." What is biologically possible, like women leading, men caring for children, culture often says no. While what is biologically impossible, like the purity of caste systems, the superiority of noble blood, culture may say must be so. Humans created various hierarchies and then claimed they were natural, divinely ordained, eternally unchanging, thus consolidating the positions of vested interests. Harari sharply points out, history has never been just. Many social institutions we take for granted today, sexism, racism, class division, were invented after the agricultural revolution and solidified over generations. Having introduced the content of Sapiens, let us also look at external critiques of the agricultural fraud theory. Harari devotes an entire chapter to arguing that the agricultural revolution was history's biggest fraud, written brilliantly and with a very unique perspective. The picture he paints is, hunter-gatherers worked only 3 to 6 hours a day, had diverse diets, balanced nutrition, strong bodies, and were free from infectious diseases, living an original affluent society. Farmers, on the other hand, stooped all day, ate monotonously, suffered from various diseases, and their quality of life declined significantly. This assertion sounds shocking, but it has also received substantial criticism from various quarters. They point out that Harari makes several serious errors here. First, his sample selection is heavily biased. The utopia that Harari describes, where one can pick fruit from the breadfruit tree, is rare on Earth, found only on a few Pacific islands and parts of North America. For the vast majority of hunter-gatherer tribes, hunger was a constant reality, and most of human history saw people often going hungry. The Hiwi people of Venezuela, for example, consume only about 1,705 calories per day, far below the energy needed for normal modern activity. Using the lives of a few lucky groups to represent the entire hunter-gatherer era is like using billionaires to represent the living conditions of all modern people. A classic case of overgeneralization, somewhat like the well-fed not knowing the hungry. Second, he ignores the harsh other side of hunter-gatherer life. In an era without medicine, infant mortality was extremely high. Injuries from infections were almost invariably fatal. Winter famines were frequent, and tribal conflicts were constant. These were the daily realities for most foragers. Archaeological evidence shows that average lifespan in foraging societies was much lower than in agricultural societies. Those who lived to old age were a tiny minority. Harari's idyllic picture of gathering to gossip without infectious diseases seems more like a romanticized imagination. Third, he overlooks the irreplaceable civilizational achievements brought by agriculture. Agriculture did bring hard labor, but it also solved the problem of food security, stabilized nomadic life, created surplus, and laid the foundation for the development of superstructure, politics, and culture. Without agriculture, there would be no cities, writing, states, art, science. All the achievements of civilization we understand today rest on the surplus provided by agriculture. To define the agricultural revolution simply as making more people live worse lives is a one-sided moral critique. Fourth, there is a logical leap in his reasoning chain. Some commentators have pointed out that Harari's agricultural fraud theory is an extension of the theory of evolution from Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, from the biological fact that genes evolve not for individual happiness, directly to the value judgment that agriculture made humans more miserable, lacking rigorous argumentation in between. What are your thoughts on these controversies? Feel free to leave comments and share your views. Part 3. The Unification of Humankind. Why is the world getting smaller? After the cognitive and agricultural revolutions, human history entered a long phase of civilizational evolution, spanning from about 5,000 years ago to 500 years ago. Although this period lacked the dramatic breakthroughs of the previous two revolutions, it showed a clear and irreversible long-term trend, what Harari calls the unification of humankind. He argues that the overall trend of human history is toward unification. Although there have been localized splits, wars, and regressions, division is temporary. Unification is the long-term trend. From a world where every valley might have had its own unique culture 30,000 years ago, to today where nearly all of us share the same global economic system, scientific methodology, and international legal and human rights frameworks, this integration process has been slow, but its direction has never changed and is accelerating. Harari writes, over the millennia, the direction of history is toward unification. Today, almost all humans accept the same geopolitical, economic, legal, and scientific systems. Although there are still strong national differences and cultural diversities, these differences increasingly resemble substyles within a single global civilization, rather than separate parallel worlds. The three core forces driving human unification are money, empire, and religion. Money may be the most successful fictional story ever invented. Think about it. What value does a thin piece of paper have? It is just a piece of paper with some patterns printed on it. It cannot be eaten, worn, or used to shelter from wind and rain, and it cannot cure illnesses. But when everyone believes that this piece of paper can be exchanged for food, clothes, houses, and medicine, it acquires real value. Harari points out, whatever form money takes, its value exists only in our common imagination. Trust is the most basic raw material of all forms of money. Without that trust, money is just waste paper or metal discs. The greatness of money lies in enabling people who do not know each other and do not trust each other to cooperate effectively. A devout Christian and a devout Muslim may hate each other because of religious differences, but they can both accept the value of gold coins because there is a shared foundation of trust behind them. Harari writes, money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever created. The monetary system has two principles. Everything can be exchanged, everyone believes. That is, money can be exchanged for any good or service, and almost everyone on earth believes in its value. Harari also makes a sharp comparison. The key point about religious belief is that you believe. The key point about monetary belief is that others believe. I do not need to believe that gold has any intrinsic value. I only need to believe that when I trade with gold, others will accept it. This belief in others' belief forms the core pillar of the monetary system and the fundamental reason it can transcend cultural, religious, and political boundaries. Empire is the second force driving human unification. Harari gives a clear definition of empire. An empire is a political order with two important features. First, an empire must rule many different peoples, each with its own distinct culture, identity, and territory. Second, an empire has flexible borders and can expand almost infinitely. The logic of empire is simple and brutal. Conquer, assimilate, unify. The Roman Empire turned the Mediterranean into our sea, spread Latin and Roman law across Europe, and made Gauls, Britons, and Egyptians into Roman citizens. The Arab Empire spread Islam and Arabic from the Middle East to North Africa, Spain, and Central Asia, bringing Islamic civilization to a global zenith in the 7th to 10th centuries. The Mongol Empire opened overland routes between East and West, allowing constant caravans on the Silk Road and facilitating the exchange of technology and ideas. The British Empire spread English, British law, and parliamentary systems to all continents, and its cultural influence remains deep to this day. The process of imperial expansion was full of bloodshed, violence, and enslavement, often causing great suffering to conquered peoples. But from a long historical perspective, empires did greatly promote cultural diffusion and human integration. Most countries today are multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multilingual, a shared legacy of empires. Harari points out, the global empire we are forming now is not ruled by any particular nation or ethnic group. Like the late Roman Empire, it is ruled by a multi-ethnic elite, bound by common culture and common interests. We are moving toward a global empire, without a clear emperor or capital, but globalized economic, cultural, and political rules are already ubiquitous. Religion is the third unifying force. Harari defines religion as a system of human norms and values based on a belief in a superhuman order. Religion has two basic elements. First, religion holds that there is a superhuman order, not invented by human imagination or agreement. Second, based on that superhuman order, religion develops norms and values that it considers binding. Early religions were often local. Each tribe had its own guardian spirit and ancestral gods. Each mountain and river had its own spirits. Such local religions could not achieve cross-cultural unification because one tribe's gods had nothing to do with another tribe's gods. But later universal religions, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, claimed their truths applied to all humans, regardless of race, language, or region. The power of religion lies in making people of different languages, races, and countries share a common identity. An Italian and an Ethiopian may never have met, but if both are Catholic, they can pray together in the same church. A Chinese person and an Indonesian may not share a language, but if both are Muslim, they can pray side by side in the same mosque. This shared belief-based identity transcends racial, linguistic, and national boundaries, providing a unifying link across political and cultural borders. Harari concludes that money, empire, and religion, over the past millennia, have continuously pushed humanity toward globalization. The world we live in today, with its global free trade system, international legal framework, universal human rights values, and ubiquitous internet communication, is the inevitable result of this long-term historical trend. Although globalization currently faces some headwinds, from a millennia-scale perspective, the trend of integration will not reverse, because technological, economic, and cultural forces are more deeply rooted than any short-term political turmoil. Part 4. The Scientific Revolution, from discovery of ignorance to becoming God. About 500 years ago, human history entered its fourth and final revolution, the scientific revolution. It began in Europe in the 16th century and then spread like wildfire across the globe, thoroughly reshaping every aspect of human life. Harari points out that the core breakthrough of the scientific revolution was not telescopes, microscopes, steam engines, or computers, not any specific invention, but a fundamental conceptual revolution. Humanity finally discovered its own ignorance. Before this, most cultures firmly believed that all important knowledge had already been mastered and recorded by the ancients. In the Bible, the Quran, the 4 books and 5 classics, the works of ancient Greek philosophers. Scholars' work was not to explore the unknown, but to endlessly interpret and comment on these classics, extracting wisdom to guide life. No one thought there was any fundamentally undiscovered knowledge waiting to be unearthed. This mentality led to centuries of intellectual stagnation. But the scientific revolution completely overturned this view. It acknowledged a shocking and liberating fact. We know very little about most of the world, and this ignorance can be overcome through systematic inquiry. Harari notes that modern science has 3 distinctive features: willingness to admit ignorance, emphasis on observation and data, and pursuit of new capabilities. The scientific revolution is essentially a revolution of ignorance, which made humanity begin to admit that we know almost nothing about many of the most important questions. Modern science is more dynamic, more flexible, and more inquisitive than any previous knowledge system. This humble admission of ignorance unleashed unprecedented curiosity and creativity. Copernicus doubted geocentrism, Galileo observed the heavens with his telescope, Newton explored universal gravitation, Darwin questioned the origin of species, and Einstein challenged the absoluteness of space and time. These great scientists all shared a common trait. They were not satisfied with existing answers. They were willing to admit that existing knowledge was insufficient. They dared to ask, "We don't know," and then sought answers through observation, experimentation, and mathematical reasoning. Such an attitude was almost absent in earlier civilizations. The scientific revolution did not occur in isolation. It needed powerful external drivers. Harari points out that science and empire were conjoined twins, mutually dependent and reinforcing. Why? Because scientific research required substantial funding, and empires and commercial powers needed useful knowledge to expand territory, open sea routes, exploit resources, and conquer enemies. European explorers sailed to distant lands backed by the generous patronage of kings and queens, and the maps, plant specimens, astronomical observations, and ethnographic records they brought back in turn greatly enhanced imperial governance, military efficiency, and commercial profit. When Columbus crossed the Atlantic, he carried a royal Spanish charter and a desire for gold, spices, and Christian converts. Captain Cook explored the Pacific 3 times, drawing accurate charts while declaring British sovereignty over Australia and New Zealand. Every voyage was simultaneously scientific exploration and imperial expansion. Harari writes, European imperialism went to distant shores not only for new territories, but also for new knowledge. The driving force behind both modern science and modern empire was a sense of dissatisfaction, a feeling that there was always something important waiting to be explored and mastered beyond the horizon. This dissatisfaction with the unknown was the common engine of modern science and imperial expansion. Harari also raises a thought-provoking point. Scientific research must ally with some religion or ideology to flourish. Ideology justifies the cost of research, and in return, ideology influences the direction of science and determines how its findings are used. Science itself has no moral dimension. It only reveals how the world works and cannot answer what we should do. The direction of scientific research and the application of its results are inevitably shaped by political, economic, military, and ideological forces. The atomic bomb was developed to defeat enemies. The space race was driven by Cold War rivalry. Today's gene editing is driven by medical ambitions, but may also be used for eugenics and military purposes. Harari reminds us that science is not neutral. Its direction depends on human value choices. The scientific revolution also gave birth to another powerful fictional story, capitalism. Its central tenet is that the future will be better than the present, and economic growth is limitless. As long as we keep investing in science, technology, and production, the total pie of human society can keep expanding. This belief sounds unremarkable today, but for most of history, it was considered absurd. People generally believed that resources were finite. The economy was zero-sum. If you gained more, someone else lost. If this generation lived well, the next would suffer. Almost all civilizations in history assumed that total wealth was fixed, and that one person's enrichment necessarily meant another's impoverishment. So rich people are immoral, and egalitarianism became widespread social values. But capitalism told a different story. Through technological innovation and capital accumulation, the wealth of society as a whole could grow simultaneously, and everyone could benefit. This belief unleashed enormous economic energy, giving rise to the Industrial Revolution and modern market economies. Harari writes, "Greed is good. Making yourself rich also benefits others. Capitalism's foundational principle is that economic growth is the highest good. The modern economy is characterized by sustained exponential growth, driven by scientific discoveries and inventions. The cycle of imperial capitalism, new discoveries, colonies, profits, trust, formed a powerful positive feedback loop that propelled Europe and the global economy into exponential expansion. However, Harari also warns, the market cannot function independently of politics. Political systems must intervene through laws to prohibit fraud and maintain trust and economic order. Pure free markets do not exist. The healthy functioning of markets requires the rule of law, regulation, and public infrastructure. The Industrial Revolution was a direct continuation and upgrade of the scientific revolution. Steam engines, electricity, internal combustion engines, computers, and the internet. These technological advances, passed like batons, fundamentally transformed human production, lifestyles, and even ways of thinking. But Harari points out that the most profound change of the Industrial Revolution was actually in the use of energy. Before this, all energy ultimately came from the sun. Plants converted solar energy into biomass through photosynthesis. Humans and animals consumed plants to get energy, and wind and water power were just solar-heated air and water cycles. The total energy of the biosphere depended on annual solar radiation, with a clear annual limit. But the Industrial Revolution allowed humanity to begin large-scale extraction and burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, which were ancient solar energy stored through geological processes over hundreds of millions of years. It was as if humanity suddenly discovered a vast energy treasure house, multiplying available energy hundreds of times over in just a few centuries. From then on, economic growth was no longer constrained by the year's solar input, and human productivity began to soar exponentially. Harari writes, "The core of the Industrial Revolution was a revolution in energy conversion." He also notes, The modern economy relies on people's trust in the future and capital investment. Capitalism and consumerism have merged into the dual engine of the modern economy. The rich invest, and everyone else buys. This dual engine drives the formation of consumer society, while also bringing serious problems like resource depletion, environmental destruction, and climate change. In the later part of the book, Harari raises an unsettling question, arguably the most philosophical part of the book. Are we happier than our ancestors? The answer is not clear, and may even be pessimistic. We certainly have longer lifespans, fewer diseases, richer material lives, and easier access to information. But we also face unprecedented mental stress, anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Epidemiological data show that the incidence of depression and anxiety in modern developed countries is far higher than in traditional agricultural or hunter-gatherer societies. We spend all day on our phones and screens, but deep social connections are steadily eroding. Harari notes that happiness is not simply a matter of improved material conditions. Biologists and neuroscientists have shown through numerous experiments that a person's happiness level is largely determined by genes and neurotransmitter levels. Lottery winners return to their baseline happiness within a year, and people who suffer severe accidents also return to near baseline levels within a year. If technological progress cannot bring sustained happiness, is the enormous cost worth it? Harari does not give a clear answer, but the question itself has profound and sobering implications. In the final part of the book, Harari turns to the future, the most forward-looking and controversial section. Today, humanity is rewriting the rules of life itself as never before. Bioengineering allows us to precisely edit genes. CRISPR gene editing tools now enable scientists to modify DNA sequences like editing text. Bionics lets us replace damaged organs with mechanical and electronic devices, even creating artificial hearts and retinas that are more powerful than natural ones. Artificial intelligence and inorganic life are evolving at unprecedented speed. They are no longer just calculation tools, but are beginning to possess learning, reasoning, creativity, and even emotional simulation. All these technologies challenge a core question, the definition of human itself. Harari asks, if we can use technology to upgrade humans, increasing intelligence, extending lifespan, altering emotional patterns, are they upgraded beings still human? Would they become a new species, even a new kind of god? He cites an ancient legend, the Gilgamesh project. In the Mesopotamian epic from over 4,000 years ago, the hero Gilgamesh sets out on a long journey to seek immortality, crossing darkness, defeating monsters, diving to the bottom of the sea for the plant of life, but ultimately failing. Today, humanity's pursuit of immortality has never stopped, and is even more fervent than before. Gene editing, nanobots, mind uploading, cryonics, things that once existed only in myths and science fiction are becoming serious scientific endeavors, with top scientists and tech moguls pouring huge resources into research. Harari writes at the beginning of the book, history begins when humans create gods, and ends when humans become gods. Today, we stand on the threshold of becoming gods. We have the power to alter life itself, to destroy the entire planet, and to create entirely new species and new intelligences that have never existed. But the biggest question is, do we know what we want? For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens has relied on the ability to tell fictional stories, to transform from an insignificant African species into the master of the earth. We have created religions, nations, money, corporations, laws, and morals. These fictional entities have constructed our entire social reality and given us unprecedented power. But now, the question is no longer, what can we do? Because our capabilities are expanding exponentially. But what do we actually want? Are our desires limitless? What are our goals? Where are our ethical boundaries? Harari does not provide answers. He simply places this sharp question before us. And this question, where will Homo sapiens go? What kind of existence will we become? May require each of us to answer, and to answer now, because technology will not wait. Let me end with the book's final sentence, which is both a warning and an encouragement. With great power comes great responsibility, but we are irresponsible, greedy, and do not even know what we want. There is no danger greater than this. Let us also discuss external critiques of the cognitive revolution concept. Harari divides human history into three stages: the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the scientific revolution, a framework that is clear and powerful, but has also attracted sharp criticism from academics. First, The term cognitive revolution itself is a redefinition. In English-language academia, the cognitive revolution originally referred to a methodological shift in psychology after World War II around cognitive behavior. Harari borrowed and redefined this term, seemingly to align with the subsequent revolutions and create a narrative of continuous revolution. Second, the date of 70,000 years ago lacks solid evidence. Harari claims that 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens suddenly acquired language and imagination, sparking the cognitive revolution. But the problem is that prehistoric humans left only bones and remains. We cannot trace their mental world 70,000 years ago. This inference also conflicts with other studies. According to Diamond's summary in Guns, Germs, and Steel, the evolution of human thought and language was a long, gradual process, not a single mutation. More critically, it was only about 40,000 years ago that human material culture began to accelerate dramatically, gradually producing bows, needles, clothing, boats, and pottery, a process that continued for thousands of years, which Diamond called the Great Leap Forward. Harari seems to have been inspired by Diamond but pushed this revolution back to 70,000 years ago. Regardless of the dating, can a process that began gradually 70,000 years ago and was enriched over tens of thousands of years by various inventions still be called a single revolution? Princeton neuroscientist Darshana Narayanan, writing in Current Affairs, labeled Harari a science populist. Science populism refers to a gifted storyteller who concocts sensational stories based on scientific facts, presented in simple, emotive, persuasive language, but stripped of nuance and doubt, with a false sense of authority. Narayanan points out that Harari, like political populists, is a source of misinformation. She gives a concrete example. Harari writes in the book that Homo sapiens, not long ago, were little creatures on the savannah, full of fear and anxiety, and that many of the disasters in human history actually stem from this overly hasty jump in status. Narayanan criticizes this as sounding like dialogue from The Lion King, engaging and attractive, but completely unscientific. What makes a lion confident? Does anxiety make humans cruel? These assertions have no experimental or observational support. Philosopher and literary critic Galen Strawson, in a 2014 review, described Sapiens as exaggerated and sensational, with its sweeping judgments carrying a kind of destructive rudeness. Another commentator, John Sexton, concluded that the book is fundamentally unserious and unworthy of the widespread acclaim and attention it has received. Let us also consider the philosophical contradictions and omissions. This is one of the deepest academic critiques of Harari. Philosopher Brian J. Collins points out that Harari is undermined by the philosophical position he himself advanced in his first bestseller. To advance a coherent political or ideological argument, Harari first needs to solidify his philosophical commitments, which he precisely fails to do. Specifically, these contradictions manifest as follows. Conflict between biological determinism and moral interpretation. Harari on one hand emphasizes that human behavior is determined by biological attributes, while on the other hand, he continually issues prophetic moral judgments about humanity's past and future. This strong logical contradiction between biological determinism and moral interpretation of history weakens the book's intellectual force. Deconstructing all fictions but unable to be self-consistent, Harari treats religion, liberalism, enlightenment, human rights, and progress as equally imagined and indiscriminately criticizes them. But if human rights are just fiction, what standard does he use to criticize historical injustice? If progress is an illusion, what is the purpose of writing this book? This radical deconstruction ultimately leads to nihilism, and Harari himself cannot truly stand outside the fictions he critiques. Conflict between imagination theory and scientific realism. Some commentators have noted that Harari, in the latter part of the book, implicitly suggests a kind of scientific realism, but this contradicts his earlier imagination theory, which might also treat science and its objects as cultural constructs. In other words, if everything is fiction, then why is science an exception? Other critiques focus on narrative flaws, top-heavy structure, and theoretical eclecticism. Many readers and reviewers have noted the structural imbalance in Sapiens. Top-heavy. The opening chapters on human evolution and anthropology feel fresh and powerful, but when it comes to the agricultural and scientific revolutions, the narrative intensity noticeably diminishes. Suspicion of theoretical eclecticism. Some commentators have suggested that the latter part of the book is essentially a repackaging of classic academic theories, e.g., Marx's monetary theory, Benedict Anderson's theory of nationalism. Harari appears to be rephrasing existing theories in accessible language rather than offering truly original insights. Structural confusion. Some readers find the book like a chronological pile-up, and one even noted that the table of contents is basically identical to the episode list of the CCTV documentary World History. There have also been political critiques regarding the book's stance, particularly its ambiguous attitude toward imperialism. This is a critique from the perspective of political philosophy. Some commentators have pointed out that Harari's attitude toward imperialism is unclear. Is he critical or ambiguous? On one hand, he describes the bloodshed, violence, and slavery of imperial expansion. On the other, he treats empire as one of the three core forces driving human unification, arguing that in the long run, empires facilitated cultural diffusion. This ambiguity leaves readers unsure of the author's stance. Is he condemning imperialism or defending it? This vagueness in value judgment weakens the book's force as a critical history. Another criticism holds that the discussion of happiness is superficial. Harari raises a profound question in the latter part of the book. Are we happier than our ancestors? However, many readers feel this section is insufficiently developed. The issues are disconnection from context. Some commentators note that the happiness section seems abrupt and does not connect well with the rest, lacking coherence and depth. Oversimplified conclusion. Harari, using biology and Buddhist ideas, argues that happiness is largely determined by genetics and that the pursuit of pleasure only leads to suffering. This conclusion is interesting, but for such a significant philosophical question, the length and depth of discussion are far from adequate. Clear influence of Buddhist thought. Harari himself has participated in meditation retreats, and his views on happiness clearly reflect Buddhist influence. Some readers believe he has imposed his personal philosophical preferences on all of humanity. There are also differing views on the book's technological determinism and fatalistic tendencies. In the final part, Harari looks ahead to how bioengineering, AI, and other technologies will change humanity. But some commentators point out that this reveals Harari's technological determinism. He believes technology has its own internal logic that humanity can hardly resist. At the same time, the book also exhibits a kind of fatalism. History seems to be a one-way street from which there is no turning back. Once humans set out on a certain path, like agriculture or technology, they can never stop. While compelling, this narrative also deprives humans of agency and choice in history. Finally, let us address the persistent Eurocentrism in the book. This is one of the most criticized points by non-Western readers. Despite the title, Human, many readers finish the book feeling it is more like a history of Europe. This Eurocentrism is evident first in its narrative structure. Harari's narrative of human civilization still firmly follows the Western classical coordinates: Mesopotamia, Rome, Christian Europe, the scientific revolution, while other civilizations, especially Eastern ones, appear more like belated, marginal footnotes supporting the main narrative. The treatment of Eastern civilizations is particularly problematic, arguably the book's greatest weakness as a history of humankind. Some commentators note that the narrative on Eastern civilizations is severely lacking. Ancient archaeological discoveries, state formation, and philosophical breakthroughs are almost entirely ignored. This is like describing a tree while only mentioning some of its branches and leaves, while completely ignoring its deep roots. Some readers have even counted that of the 64 chapters, only one concerns over 100 million people in the East, while the rest describe the stories of tens of millions in the West. A striking imbalance that leaves many readers deeply dissatisfied. Another typical problem is terminological misuse. Harari categorizes Confucianism as a religion alongside monotheism, a clear terminological error. The core of Confucianism is an ethical political philosophy oriented towards social order, fundamentally about cultivating oneself, regulating the family, governing the state, and pacifying the world, not worship of supernatural deities. This misreading leads to the omission of the vast technological and artistic achievements of the East alongside Confucianism, such as calendar mathematics based on practical reason, well known in Western military academies, the art of war with its systemic thinking, and the traditional Chinese medical system emphasizing the interaction between heaven and humans, all of which are neglected in favor of religious narratives. Deeper still is the absence of underlying civilizational logic. Harari fails to explain why, after the same cognitive revolution, humans developed such different civilizational paths. Behind this lie fundamental differences in worldview. His dissecting thinking stems from the Greek atomist and philosophical tradition, tending to objectify the world, analyze, conquer, and transform it. In this respect, Eastern and Western civilizations differ. Eastern, organic, thinking is rooted in the idea of harmony between heaven and humans, viewing the universe as a vast living whole, emphasizing connection, symbiosis, and harmony. A global perspective in studying human history requires a higher-order thinking model. The limitations of the fictional stories theory. Harari's most famous theoretical innovation is the concept of fictional stories. He argues that Homo sapiens dominates the world because we are the only animal that can believe in fictional stories. Religion, nation, money, law, human rights, corporations are all imagined realities. This view is highly thought-provoking, but it has also drawn considerable criticism. First, reducing complex social phenomena to merely stories can lead to philosophical and moral difficulties. If nation, law, and human rights are merely stories, why should we obey laws? Why defend human rights? Such a view could slide into cultural relativism and even nihilism, suggesting that all cultures and beliefs are equal, without any true or false. This could lead to moral confusion, implying that there are no universal values or truths. Second, the fictional stories theory ignores the role of power in the propagation of stories. Some scholars, from a Spinozist perspective, criticize Harari. He implicitly assumes that these fictional stories are self-generating and self-propagating, as if humans came together because they believed a certain story. But in fact, many common myths were imposed through power relations, violent conquest, or symbolic oppression. The real question is not, what do we commonly believe, but who decides what the common myth is? Harari downplays the role of power, violence, and inequality in the construction and dissemination of these fictions. Third, Harari himself cannot truly escape the fictions he criticizes. On one hand, he deconstructs the fictionality of nation, religion, and money. On the other, he argues within the framework of liberalism and humanism. Some commentators point out that Harari's work is undermined by his own philosophical stance. To advance a coherent political or ideological argument, he would need to consolidate his philosophical commitments. In other words, he critiques all fictions, but cannot find a foothold for his critique that does not depend on fiction. Finally, some commentators suggest that Harari's cultural background may have influenced his theoretical inclinations. He grew up in Israel, a multi-religious environment of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Jewish culture and religion are rich in history and stories. Harari may have profound awareness of these narratives and how they shape Jewish collective identity and culture. After tiring of the mythologized historical stories of the Old Testament, he may have swung to the opposite extreme, treating all stories as fiction. This radical deconstruction, while intellectually shocking, also loses some of the necessary moderation in historical research. Let us summarize today's content. Combining the above introduction and critique of Sapiens, we have provided you with a comprehensive overview from two angles. Reflecting on the intellectual journey we have taken, the cognitive revolution gave Homo sapiens the ability to tell fictional stories, breaking the natural limit on group size and making us the only species capable of large-scale, flexible cooperation. The agricultural revolution led humanity to abandon the original affluent society of hunting and gathering, embarking on a path of population explosion but individual quality of life decline, while also entrenching social hierarchy and inequality. Money, empire, and religion, over millennia, continually pushed humanity toward integration and unification, resulting in the globalized world we have today. And the scientific revolution led humanity to discover its ignorance, unleashing unprecedented curiosity and creativity, granting us near-divine technological power while also bringing unprecedented ethical dilemmas and existential crises. Harari, across the span of one book, traverses physics, biology, history, economics, religion, philosophy, and many other fields to tell a grand story from animals to gods. This story is both exhilarating and unsettling, forcing us to re-examine our past, present, and possible future as a species. The book's greatest power lies precisely in its deconstruction of our taken-for-granted common sense, with incisive reason and astonishing interdisciplinary vision. It does not provide standard answers, but everywhere sparks thought. It teaches us to adopt the perspective of an outsider, to examine humanity from the height of an alien planet. When we see how civilization is built on fiction, and how our social institutions and values are shaped by historical contingency, we may be able to choose our future direction more rationally, rather than being swept along by blind desires and technological inertia. Its contributions and limitations can be summarized as follows. Its greatness lies in offering an extremely inspiring macro-conceptual framework, using the concept of fictional stories to link the entire history of humanity from animals to gods, allowing ordinary readers to view themselves from a new perspective. Harari's ability to integrate interdisciplinary knowledge and popularize complex ideas is indeed admirable. However, its fatal flaw is that its underlying narrative skeleton remains Eurocentric. It successfully explains why the West conquered the world, but fails to equally and deeply explain why other, more diverse civilizations are the way they are. Scientifically, its dating of the cognitive revolution lacks evidence. In evaluating agriculture, it contrasts a romanticized foraging life with a one-sided picture of farming hardship. Philosophically, it reduces all social structures to stories, while avoiding issues of power relations and value foundations. This book is best understood as an introduction to global history from a Western perspective. It is a precious mirror, reflecting how Western intellectual elites view human history. But we need to hold up another mirror from a different angle to see the complex, diverse, and truly three-dimensional picture of human history. The true history of humankind still awaits future writers. If you are interested in this book, I recommend reading the original. It is lively and humorous, full of startling insights and unexpected metaphors. The book's significance lies not in telling you what humans are, but in making you think for yourself what you want to become. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this in-depth episode. By studying others, we understand ourselves. By studying history, we understand the rise and fall of civilizations. I am your time travel navigator, Lawrence Stardust. See you next time.